I now have the pleasure of introducing our 2015 commencement speaker, David Aronoff. David is a general partner at Flybridge Capital Partners, whose investment interests and experience include the SaaS, cloud, mobile, data analytics, video, and information security sectors. David currently manages the firm's New York City office and sits on the boards of Flybridge portfolio companies, Apiary, BetterCloud, BitSide, and Sand9. Prior to joining the firm in 2005, David spent nearly a decade focusing on early-stage investing at Greylock Partners and held development and management roles at Chipcom, a leading enterprise network equipment vendor. While working full-time on his MBA, David co-founded the Attitude Network, acquired by the Globecom, an internet content startup with the top 2 game sites of the day, HappyPuppyCom and GamesDomainCom. Early in his career, he held technical positions at Bell Labs, where he developed secure network systems. David is UVM class of 1986, cum laude in computer science with college honors, an MS in computer engineering from the University of Southern California, and an MBA with distinction from Harvard Business School. Now, for those of you who've been a part of the business pitch competition over the last 4 years or so, this was inspiration of David Aronoff and his support that allowed us to do that. Please join me in welcoming David Aronoff to the podium.
Dean Sharma, members of the faculty and administration, parents and friends and honored guests, but most importantly you, the graduates of the class of 2015, thanks for inviting me to speak with you today. When Dean Sharma asked me to give the speech today, I said yes quickly, without reflecting that it had been 30 years since I had to write a paper for UVM, and never had to present it in the middle of the Flynn Theater. This is really an incredible honor to address you today at my alma mater. It's also the alma mater of my mother, my sister, and a number of my cousins. As I'm sure all you graduates understand completely, UVM is an incredibly special place. And I can attest to the years of your life spent here will leave an indelible mark upon each of you. There are few better feelings I know, and I got to experience it yesterday, cresting the hill on Interstate 89 and seeing the whale's tails, greeting you as you come back to Burlington. Well, given that you've spent several years absorbed in academic pursuits, it seems fitting that I talk to you today about what comes next, your expectations, your career, and especially your plans. Looking at you and thinking about Dean Sharma describing that half of you have told the university of your plans and half have resisted to this point, I think I can divide you into 2 broad categories. Some of you sit there very confident. You've created incredibly well thought out, highly strategic plans for the next 5 years or perhaps longer. You're shining examples of the critical thinking skills this institution and her tremendous faculty have instilled in you during your time here. But more, maybe most of you, I suspect, look at those classmates who have those plans with a little bit of envy. And that may be because you're dissatisfied with the plans you've made, or maybe you have no plans at all just yet. And though it seems like only yesterday, I sat in your seat 29 years ago, which is very scary to think about. And I was very sure of which of those 2 buckets I fit into. I came to UVM, and let me just give you a little bit of my history. I came to UVM in 1982, squarely in that first category. I was confident with a well thought out, highly strategic plan for my future. This was plan A. I was convinced I was going to be a lawyer. My parents and my family thought I should be a lawyer. My friends, my teachers, almost everyone who knew me in my hometown of Lyndonville. I don't know if there are any Lyndonville grads out there. Great to see it. Everyone expected I would be a lawyer. It seemed at the time like it was my destiny. I came to UVM, and as Dean Sharma mentioned, I majored in computer science. I was a giant nerd way before it was cool. And in the 1980s, this personal computer thing was starting to take shape. That's back when computers were the size of warehouses, not wristwatches. And I realized that as time went on, the legal world might need some people who understood technology. I did well in my studies at UVM. I did well in the LSAT, and brimming with overconfidence, which was my normal state at that time, that Plan A culminated with a single application to a famous Ivy League law school in Boston. Had Twitter been invented 20 years sooner, that school would have gladly sent a rejection via tweet, saving the cost of a letter, an envelope, and a stamp. And that's why 29 years ago, my well-thought-out, highly strategic, comprehensive life plan came to a resounding thud. And why 29 years ago, still somewhat hazy from the combination of rejection and senior week, I sat squarely in that second bucket like many of you, having scrambled during the last months of school to create options post-graduation, and really not quite sure where I was headed. And this was lesson one for me about plans. They don't always work out. It's best framed by that eminent 21st century philosopher, Mike Tyson, who you probably know from the Hangover movies, and your parents and I remember when he was a prize fighter. Professor Tyson is famously quoted as saying, "Everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth." So if you haven't figured this out before, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, let alone on your commencement day, that life is constantly going to throw curveballs at you, and no matter how well you prepare, no matter how well the faculty have prepared you, you're going to strike out. And statistically, you're going to strike out often. How you respond to these failures is essential, and it's one of the hardest skills to develop. Steve Jobs, in his 2005 commencement speech to graduates of Stanford, the UVM of Silicon Valley, said, Steve Jobs said, "I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith." Steve Jobs wasn't the only one who failed. Abraham Lincoln lost 5 separate elections and a case argued in front of the Supreme Court before he became president. And though he never counted, Thomas Edison reckoned that he constructed more than 3,000 theories in connection with the electric light and possibly 10,000 experiments to develop the alkaline battery before he had paid her. A friend asked him, "Isn't it a shame that with a tremendous amount of work that you've done, you haven't been able to get any results?" And Edison replied with a smile, "Results? Why, man, I've gotten lots of results. I know several thousand things that won't work." So, reeling from that first knockdown, I needed a new plan. At the time, I still saw myself as a lawyer, so I concocted Plan A Prime. First, get the best job that I could. In this case, it was at AT&T Bell Labs, a company that most of you have never heard of. You've heard of AT&T, but the labs you can think of as the Google labs of the 1980s. And I thought this job would look great on my law school applications. Second part of the plan was to get a master's degree in computer science, and the Bell Labs job included an internal scholarship to get that master's degree. And though I had never really considered getting a master's in computer science, I again thought that that would look great on my law school applications. I decided to take the LSAT again to try and improve my score and to apply to a broader set of law schools this time, just not Harvard. The objective plans of Plan A Prime looked great. I was one of 2 UVM grads in '86 who were offered a job at Bell Labs. I got my master's at University of Southern California, and I was researching a new field called internet security, and this is when the internet was still in its infancy. I improved my LSAT score, and then I applied to 6 law schools, and this time I got into 3 of them, and I enrolled at Georgetown. So while it seemed that my comprehensive, well-thought-out life plan was back on track, there was one small problem. I was absolutely miserable. Let me tell you why. First, coming from Lyndonville, Vermont, it was clear to me from day one that AT&T was not the right place for me. and my apologies to anyone out there who works at AT&T or any of you who have taken a job at AT&T. The facility I worked employed nearly 8,000 people, and that was 3 times or more the size of my hometown. And I found the atmosphere, quite frankly, mind-numbing. It was a massive bureaucratic monument to underachievement. And a huge group of incredibly smart people that it seemed to me in my 22-year-old overconfident self were accomplishing very little. And the program at USC, while it was interesting, and the idea of being in the warmth for 12 months after 4 years in the cold winters in Burlington were really enticing, Los Angeles wasn't the right fit for me either. I missed my friends. None of my friends from UVM went out to LA with me. I missed my family. I missed the season. Seeing Santa Claus in shorts was actually quite frightening. And I felt lonely and homesick. And probably most kind of concerning to me was that I felt this increasing uneasiness about law school. When I sat down to write the core essay that every application had, why do you want to be a lawyer? I struggled. And the honest answer was that I really didn't want to be one. Being miserable can sometimes be a gift. And it made me realize that I needed a plan B. So with very little savings in the bank, I quit my job at Bell Labs, and it was literally the happiest day I spent at that company. I moved to Boston to be with my best friends from UVM and to be closer to my parents in Vermont. And then I took a job at a startup. I took a 40% pay cut to actually join a fraternity brother of mine from UVM at a tech startup that was backed by something I had never heard of called venture capital. I was ecstatic. 6 weeks into the new job, I called Georgetown to request a refund for my law school deposit, which they politely declined. So this leads me to lesson 2. Position yourself for fortunate accidents to happen. And unlike lesson 1, this one did not involve getting punched in the mouth. It was far more subtle, and to be honest, I only recognized it in the rearview mirror about 20 years later. As I look back at that period, the 20 years after UVM, my career path looked a bit random. I worked at 6 different jobs in 3 industries. I got 2 advanced degrees in different concentrations, and neither of them in law, thankfully. And I lived in 5 different cities. But through a different lens, a clearer one for me, I saw a schematic of fortunate events appear, and at the center of this diagram was UVM. UVM was the biggest and most fortunate accident of my life, and let me explain why. I'll start with a secret that I'm not sure that Dean Sharma knows, and he might not be that happy that I'm about to expose it. UVM wasn't my first choice. I told you earlier that UVM was the alma mater of my mother and my sister and a number of my cousins. It was my hometown college, and that's precisely why it wasn't my first choice. I wanted something different. At the time, I was convinced that I wanted to go to Cornell. During 1982, my senior year in high school, UVM launched for the first time a competition that was called the Vermont Scholars. And my understanding is that they've actually brought it back. It was called the Green and Gold for a while. And in the first years of this scholarship competition, 2 students from each of the state's counties were invited to participate in a competition, and 9 winners would be awarded a full 4-year scholarship to UVM. I was number 3 in my county, and I was only asked to participate in the scholarship competition when number 1 backed out because she decided to go to a different school. And because I was certain that I was not headed to UVM, I was pretty relaxed during the competition, and I won. But I didn't want to go to UVM. So while all this was happening, my parents' business suffered a pretty serious setback, and the cost of a private Ivy League education took center stage. I was faced with a difficult choice at the time, a mountain of debt versus 100% free education. And it turned out it was an easy choice to make. And quite frankly, one that I've never regretted, one that I wonder why I ever thought about a different plan in the first place. And it was caused by a total accident, the woman from my county deciding to go somewhere else. And this accident has really been responsible, either directly or indirectly, for pretty much everything that's happened to me since, including the following things that I'd like to attribute to UVM. I learned to become an entrepreneur here. I joined a small business that my fraternity had started, and my goals at that point weren't lofty. We weren't trying to become the next Uber. Uber wasn't even thought of, obviously, at that time, but it was to make some spending money and maybe to improve my social life. But helping that small company grow began my love of startups. I got that job at Bell Labs because UVM was one of the few campuses where they recruited, and even though I hated nearly every waking moment there, that job introduced me to this emerging field of computer security, allowed me to research it more thoroughly through the internal scholarship to USC, and that developed a foundation for some industry expertise that I rely upon today. And I joined my UVM fraternity brother, who actually got me the job at this startup, despite them probably not wanting to interview me. And that company became successful and was really just this inspiration for me to stay at small businesses, to never look back at giant businesses again. And that fortunate accident led to some life-changing events. Meeting my wife, Jessica, we've been married for almost 24 years now. Finally getting accepted. You can clap, she deserves it. Finally getting accepted at that Ivy League school that had rejected me 10 years earlier, but not for law school. And joining actually now a couple of venture capital firms where investing in internet security has become one of my core focus. Now, this isn't to say that my path has been smooth. Quite the contrary, and I encourage you to remember lesson 1. And while it's easy to look back and identify the fortunate accidents through the rearview mirror, how can you construct these kinds of accidents to happen in the first place? How can you construct your own good luck? That's a tough one. And one problem with accidents is you can't predict their impact ahead of time. Taking thoughtful chances is the only way I know to generate conditions for fortunate accidents to occur. And that only gets harder as you get older and responsibilities mount. The one thing I can say for sure is that life is way too short to be miserable. We spend about 1/3 of our lives working. Do you really want to be miserable 1/3 of your time on this planet? And while some failure along the way is unavoidable, I encourage you to listen to that inner voice when it signals unhappiness to you and to learn to trust it and make changes to your plans. At this point, you may be thinking that I'm anti-planning or that I think plans are irrelevant. Your parents may be muttering under their breath that after 4 years and untold thousands in tuition to UVM, who's this guy to encourage my children to amble aimlessly forward and let the universe provide? This is not my message. Plans are important. They help you think strategically about what may come. They force you to organize your thoughts and actions toward goals that are important to you, and they let you measure your progress against those goals. They can also kickstart you when you feel stuck, even if you don't know what your ultimate goals are. George Harrison wrote a great song, and the lyric, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there." One of my mentors uses this phrase to encourage his employees to constantly reevaluate their course along the way and to make corrections if they're needed. And that's a very critical need for you, especially now. And that leads to lesson 3. Your world is changing faster than ever. It's changing faster than your parents' and my world. Your grandparents likely worked the same job for their entire careers. Your parents may have had 2 or 3 employers. A recent future workplace study that predicts that your generation expects to stay in their jobs for less than 3 years. This implies you could have more than 15 jobs during your lifetime. That's not necessarily because you're going to be job hopping, but more likely caused by new industries emerging and old ones fading away, because the world that you've been given is changing daily. Tim Urban writes that this happens because more advanced societies have the ability to progress at a faster rate than less advanced societies, precisely because they're more advanced. He proposes that if you took a person from the year 1750 and brought them to 2015, they would drop dead almost immediately, simply from seeing the world around us. He theorizes that for people from 1750 to pull the same trick and to observe that drop dead effect, they'd have to go back in time to roughly 12,000 BC and pull a cave dweller out who lived before the first agricultural revolution, before the first cities, or before the concept of civilization. Looking into the future, Urban predicts the advent of artificial superintelligence, machines that are smarter than all humans. And the article posits that that's more than likely this could happen within your lifetime. So while we may disagree that we're less than 70 years away from the robots taking over, it's hard to not deny the speed at which monumental changes are occurring. Look no further than the palms of your hands. The first iPhone was only released in 2007, when most of you were in middle school. My first cell phone required a car's battery to power it, and there was no way that my VW Golf was going to fit in my back pocket. You literally have a supercomputer in your palm, or as of a few weeks ago, on your wrist. What advances will the next 8 years bring? We're living in an on-demand age, and you have the unique opportunity to take advantage of this period of intense and rapid change. I encourage you not to ignore it, or maybe the robots will get you. So at the end of the day, your commencement day, what would I like you to remember? First, it was a very rude awakening for me to suffer my first significant failure at 21. It was far from my last. When that inevitable punch comes that lands you on the mat, figure out the reasons why you were knocked down, file them away for future reference, and then dust yourselves off and get back into the fight. Life moves way too quickly to wallow in pity, and the longer you do, the harder it's going to be to get back upright. Get prepared for that next punch that might come from a different source or for a different reason. The lessons of success are often hard to recognize because they may have been accidental. The lessons of failure should really be hard for you to ignore. Remember Steve Jobs, sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. Secondly, you can't force good luck to happen. The world just doesn't work that way. What you can do is influence how you work with the world. Surround yourself with good and positive, smart people, and try to be authentically helpful. We increasingly live in what's becoming a favor economy. Be helpful to others, not with any expectation of gain, but because it can provide opportunities to learn and create lasting connections that may cause interesting accidents to happen in the future. I've created a lot of my own good luck by simply introducing good people to one another. It's amazing to see how these relationships pay dividends long down the road. And third, while the world is moving faster than ever, you're entering one of greater opportunity than ever before. And I believe that you have the chance to change the world meaningfully on a scale that hasn't been seen in more than 100 years. Old media like television and newspapers are being eviscerated, reinvented by new models like Meerkat, Periscope, and Twitter. Entirely new businesses like Airbnb and Venmo, which didn't exist a decade ago, are bursting onto the scene and nearly overnight becoming multi-billion-dollar companies. And they're being started and run by women and men in your age group, not ours. As newly minted graduates of the UVM School of Business and aspiring captains of industry, what will it take for you to be successful? Who will be your generation's Thomas Edison or Andrew Carnegie or Elon Musk or Ira Allen? A lot depends on your resiliency, the thoughtful chances you take, and your ability to adapt to and capitalize on this changing world. I can't wait to hear how your plans evolve, how you respond to your setbacks, how you meet this challenging future, and how you create your own fortunate accidents. Graduates of the University of Vermont School of Business Class of 2015, it was my great honor to address you today. Congratulations on your graduation.